Hello, welcome to this week's sermon. This sermon is for the 21st of September 2025, and that will be the 25th in Ordinary Time, Year C. And I'm using the second set of readings, which are Ezra chapter 1, verses 1 to 11, Psalm 129, and John's Gospel chapter 7, verses 14 to 36. The opening of the book of Ezra is one of the high points of the Jewish tradition. After years of exile, they are to be allowed home. This restoration comes as a free gift. They have not conquered anyone in battle. They have not bought their way to freedom. They have not just outmaneuvered their way around an opponent, like Moses did Pharaoh when they left Egypt. This time, a new overlord has taken over from their Babylonian masters, and he has let them go. The man who has restored Zion is Cyrus the Great, the ruler of the Persians. This is a liberation like no other, surpassing even their wildest dreams. Cyrus not only lets them go home, he organizes a gift of provisions for their journey and restores the treasures of the temple which the Babylonians had looted. What do we know about Cyrus the Great? Well, he created an empire which at the time was the biggest in history, stretching across much of Western and Central Asia. His descendants extended Persian rule briefly as far east as India, as far south as Egypt, and as far west as Libya. Building an empire is the relatively easy bit. You defeat every local army that comes against you. If you've got tactical or technological superiority, well, keep at it and you'll keep winning. But keeping an empire is extremely difficult. Cyrus's method was quite novel at the time. He respected the local customs and religions of his conquered peoples. He applies the same methodology to his Jewish subjects, allowing them home and financing the rebuilding of their city and temple. It is a miracle of providence to the Jews. To Cyrus, it is realpolitik. To the Jews, it is one of the most wonderful and unexpected blessings in history, and it is remembered gratefully, even when the Persians have been replaced by other empires and rulers. At the time of Ezra, they welcomed their new overlord. Cyrus had done them a great favour. But since those days, unfortunately, they had suffered woefully under the Greek Empire and fought a costly war, the Maccabean Revolt, which ushered in a period of independence, but the nation tore itself apart in internecine squabbles and murder. It had become such a basket case of a country that the Romans invaded in 63 BC, not because they craved the country particularly, but simply to quell the unrest on their borders. Israel was pretty much a failed state by the time the Romans took charge. The bitter recriminations against Israel's enemies, which we find in Psalm 129, might be fitting to describe their treatment by Egypt, the Philistines, the Midianites, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Greeks, and perhaps also the Romans, and many others since biblical days. But they probably fit least well of all when applied to the Persians. They not only allowed the exiles back home, they also helped finance the rebuilding of the temple. And they sent a senior civil servant, Nehemiah, to organise the works when they began to flag. The Jews weren't a totally free people. They weren't totally independent, but they didn't do too badly under Persian hegemony. By the time of Jesus, therefore, the Jewish people had known two miraculous and wonderful liberations: the Exodus from Egypt and Cyrus's gift of freedom from Babylon. The first liberation had been the very crucible in which they had formed their nationhood. The latter, the glorious restoration of that nationhood. Now, however, they were in captivity again. Who now could lead them to a third and hopefully final liberation? Then Jesus steps onto the scene. To the Jewish mind of the day, the answer to that question, who would liberate them next for a final and ultimate time, was obvious. It would be the Messiah. The problem was, how will we recognize the Messiah when he comes? There have been a few pretenders around already by the time of Jesus. Our passage from John's Gospel today is complex and seems to be a collection of unrelated arguments between Jesus, the people, and the religious authorities. It's not obvious how it all hangs together. Basically, it is a new historic claim for authority and allegiance. But this time, it is not at the point of a sword. It is an invitation. The crowds and authorities clearly recognize that Jesus is an extraordinary man. He has wisdom and knowledge of the scriptures that they are at a loss to explain. How did he come by such knowledge? It is also an accepted fact among his friends and enemies alike that Jesus has done many miracles. What can this mean? Does it mean that he has the devil in him? Or does it prove he is God's Messiah? Throughout their history, God has been sovereign. His hand lay behind the exile as well as the return, working through the heart of Cyrus. So, if God worked in the past through Moses and the prophets, and could even use a foreigner like Cyrus in his providential schemes, could it be that God was now at work in this man from Nazareth? The miracles of Jesus can be seen as a demonstration of God's sovereign power over the whole of creation. If Jesus exercises such authority, surely God must have appointed him. Jesus points out that he is not making a power grab on his own behalf. He is not another Nebuchadnezzar or Cyrus or Alexander the Great or General Pompey. He is doing this to help them reconnect with their own God. So essentially, he is their friend, not their enemy. Will they recognize him as such? When Jesus cures a man on the Sabbath, the authorities choose to interpret that as a sacrilegious act, convening the statutes of Moses, rather than as a demonstration of God's saving power at work. But all of Jesus' miracles are a cause of debate, leading some to believe he is the Messiah, leading others to think he is dangerous and in league with Beelzebub. Even his opponents are rather impressed and wary of his authorities. The guards back off, do not arrest him. Not until later, when Jesus attends the Passover festival, when they will plot in secret and arrest him at night, away from the crowds. They fear that authority that hangs about Jesus' shoulders. Where does he come from? Where is he going that we cannot follow? So extraordinary is this man, Jesus, that they pose these quasi-mystical questions about him. The authorities are simply confused. But to Christian ears, it is a reference to Jesus having come from God and returning to God. It is a veiled claim to ultimate authority. Will the people choose to be under Jesus' authority, or remain under the authority of the chief priests and scribes? The same question confronts us today. To whom do we give our allegiance? Whose words or actions serve as our guides? Most of us spread our support fairly widely. We have people in music, literature, film, politics and profession that have served us as models to admire or emulate. It will be no surprise to anyone listening to me that John Wesley has been a huge influence on my life. But so too have some of the lay preachers that came to our church when I was a child in Sunday school, and our minister during my teenage years, Robin Napier, of whom the rest of the world knows nothing, but was perhaps the greatest influence upon my life. Other men and women of influence are less unquestionably positive, I have to admit. Some I have admired, I admire less now than I used to do. Some I admire still, despite having less commendable aspects to their nature that have come to public knowledge recently. But that's okay. If you only admire people who are perfect, you'll have a very short list. And where does Jesus fit in? In my list, and of course, in yours too. Those of you who claim that Jesus has been an influence upon your life, what authority does his word and action carry in your life? There's one thing for sure. Jesus has never been as underestimated by the world as he is today, since the days when the authorities of Jerusalem decided he was a troublemaker rather than a Messiah. So what do you think? Honestly, what evidence do you point to in your life if you claim Jesus has been a big influence upon you?